Craig, Alaska, is a small fishing town located just over 700 miles south of Anchorage. It has a rich fishing history dating back to the 19th century and continuing into the present. However, for over 40 years, a dark cloud has loomed over this quaint village and the state of Alaska as a whole. Born on September 5th, 1954 in Blaine, Washington, Mark Colthurst was a bright young salmon fisherman with an incredible work ethic. Colthurst had been working in the fishing industry since he was 16 and was driven by a goal to retire before the age of 50. His sisters, Lori and Lisa, described him as an entrepreneur, constantly diversifying his fishing experience while working his way from boat to boat. This ambition netted Colthurst $105,000 worth of salmon in a single week in 1979, an amount typically earned an entire season. In the winter of 1981, Colthurst purchased his first boat, Investor, a 58-foot, $850,000 seiner at just 27 years old. Colthurst traveled around the Pacific Northwest, fishing with his 5-year-old daughter, Kimberly, 4-year-old son, John, and his high school sweetheart and wife, Irene, who was pregnant with their third child. The Colthursts were joined by 4 deckhands, 17-year-old Chris Heyman, 19-year-olds Dean Moon, Jerome Keown, and Michael Stewart. After arriving in Craig on September 5th, 1982, the crew of the Investor went ashore to celebrate Mark's 28th birthday at a local restaurant. Larry Demmert, Jr., captain of the Libby 8, which was docked next to the Investor, wished Mark a happy birthday as the crew went into town. The next day, the entire crew was dead, their bodies charred within 48 hours. As night turned into early morning, a thick fog rolled into the harbor of Craig, reducing visibility to the point where one could hardly see objects just outside their windows. At roughly 2 a.m., Demmert awoke to popping noises coming from the Investor. Through the darkness of the Alaskan night, compounded by fog, Demmert could only make out a dark figure walking across the deck of the Investor, and not thinking much of it, he closed the porthole window and went back to sleep. When the residents of Craig awoke on September 6th, they noticed something strange. The Investor had become unmoored and was drifting into open water with no apparent movement on board. This attracted the attention of many fishermen, who remained glued to the port for most of the day. Suddenly, an explosion tore through the Investor, engulfing the vessel in flames that shot several feet into the air. Many locals attempted to fight the blaze, but the heat was so intense that they could not get close enough to make an impact. After the fire consumed the boat, the Investor was towed to shore by the then Chief of Police, Ray Sharpley. As the scorched wreckage was sifted through, officials discovered 4 charred bodies. Initially, investigators believed the crew had been the victim of an accidental boat fire. However, bullet holes were found in the deceased, and indications of arson involving white gas were discovered. Unlike additive-filled gasoline for cars, white gas is pure gasoline that burns much hotter and faster. Authorities then began the painstaking process of sifting through the ashes in the hull of the Investor. After countless hours of meticulous searching, teeth and bone fragments were found. These pieces were separated from the larger scene and sent to the coroner along with the other 4 intact bodies for autopsy. And aside from numerous .22 caliber bullet wounds, there was little evidence for investigators to go on. After much scrutiny, it was determined that Mark, Irene, daughter Kimberly, and Michael Stewart were the 4 intact bodies on board. Authorities were now in a race against time to identify the perpetrator. Salmon fishing season had just ended, and the killer could have been on their way out of Craig. Rumors swirled that robbery might have been the motive, as it was alleged that Mark kept over $30,000 in cash on board the Investor. This was later debunked by police after a restaurant patron came forward saying that Mark had borrowed $100 from him to pay for his birthday dinner. A couple named Bruce Anderson and Jan Kittleson provided police with their first break in the case. The duo had witnessed the immediate aftermath of the fire. As the Investor ignited, Anderson and Kittleson raced over to see if they could lend assistance. They saw a small gray skiff departing from the blaze as they arrived. Kittleson asked the man if there were people on board, to which he replied that there were. The driver of the skiff then continued back toward Craig. Kittleson assumed the driver was going to get help, and he was described as a young white male in his late teens or early 20s, with brown hair, glasses, and a baseball cap. What struck Kittleson and Anderson as odd was that they did not recognize the driver, something unusual in a small fishing community with a population of about 3,000 in 1982. Later, 2 more witnesses came forward reporting that they had seen a gray skiff dock and that its driver matched the earlier descriptions. As time passed, police concluded that the skiff driver had left Craig with the end of the season. A few days later, Jerry Mackey, a friend of Mark, was having a few beers at a local bar when he noticed a man matching the witness descriptions. Mackey called state troopers, who arrived with Kittleson and Anderson in hopes of identifying the man. However, when asked, the witnesses said that they did not recognize him. And despite this, police remained suspicious and brought the young man in for questioning. The man was identified as 24-year-old John Peel, a native of Washington State. Peel stated that he was a deckhand on Larry Demmert Jr.'s Libby 8 next to the investor. It was also revealed that Peel was well acquainted with Mark, having previously dated Mark's sister Lisa. This immediately raised alarm bells for the police. Peel had been a friend of the family and had previously worked as a deckhand for Mark on a prior boat, and police then questioned Demmert, a lifelong friend of Peel's since the age of 7. Demmert explained that he had not seen Peel in a few days and could not verify whether Peel was on the Libby 8 the night of the murders. Chief Sharpley felt that Demmert was holding back, while Demmert insisted that he was wary of the police due to his involvement in illegal drug use. Whatever the case may have been, the police continued their search for suspects. The arduous task of identifying the 4 missing people remained. These included Mark's 4-year-old son, John, Dean Moon, Jerome Keown, and Chris Heyman. 12 days after the murders, a memorial service was held for all 8 crew members, and the coroner faced difficulty identifying any other bodies due to the lack of tissue and the scarcity of bone fragments. Dental records were instrumental in identifying Heyman and Keown's remains, but the whereabouts of Moon and young John Colthurst were still unknown. 6 months after the murders, the Craig Police Department received a series of baffling calls claiming that Dean Moon had been seen alive in San Francisco. Investigators who had believed all 8 of the investors' crew had died were forced to consider Moon as a potential suspect. A group was sent to San Francisco to search for him, while other officers visited Moon's family in Blaine. The Moon family vehemently denied his involvement in the murders, and Moon was later ruled out as a suspect when part of his jawbone was found in the ashes. John's body was never found. A year after the murders, Larry Demmert Jr. changed his story, giving police new information that blew the case wide open. This time, Demmert claimed to have seen Peel crossing from the Libby 8 to the investor at 10 p.m. on the night of the murders, while the crew of the investor was hanging out. Demmert also revealed that Peel did not spend the night on the Libby 8, adding that Peel was not on the Libby 8 when he woke up the following morning. Demmert told People magazine Investigates in 2017, "I was the only person on the boat that night when I went down and when I woke up in the morning." During his second interview, it also emerged that Demmert had guns on his boat, which were unaccounted for the night of the murder. These guns, a .22 caliber revolver and a .22 caliber single-shot rifle, were later found by Demmert in the wheelhouse as the boat was being prepped for storage. Demmert claimed that he had initially withheld this information because he, quote, did not know Peel was the focus of the investigation. As the investigation progressed, Demmert felt that he needed to be truthful. After speaking with Demmert, police interviewed a second member of the Libby 8, Brian Palinkas. For the first time, Palinkas mentioned drugs in the investigation, stating that Peel had sold marijuana to Keown and Moon after bringing them onto the Libby 8 the Sunday evening before the murders. Police brought John Peel in for questioning, where he had admitted to selling marijuana to Moon and Keown that Sunday. Peel also revealed his tense relationship with Mark, who had fired him for smoking pot and drinking on the job. Despite working for Mark for over 2 years, Peel had been banned from coming aboard the boat after repeated instances of showing up intoxicated. After publishing a composite sketch of Peel in the press, police received another lead. An additional witness came forward, claiming they saw the skiff pull up to the dock and picked Peel out of a photo lineup as the driver. And just over 2 years after the crime, on September 10th, 1984, John Peel was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. Peel was brought to his arraignment the following January wearing a ski mask to avoid tainting the jury pool in a trial based entirely on circumstantial witness testimony. Peel's defense attorney argued that even if Peel had been angry at Mark for firing him, that was not sufficient reason to kill 8 people. The cornerstone of the prosecution's case was the testimony of Larry Demmert Jr., captain of the Libby 8. On the stand, Demmert provided even more new information, claiming that he saw Peel on the deck with a rifle and heard a woman scream. Demmert said that he was so frightened that he locked himself in his room and went back to sleep. The defense harshly criticized Demmert's testimony, questioning why he had withheld information. In 2017, Demmert explained, "Unless you've actually been there and tried to remember every little detail of what you did on a given night, when you're not trying to remember every little detail at the time it was going on, nobody would have the ability to do that. I'm not trying to lie. I was trying to be as honest as I could." However, it was revealed under cross-examination that Demmert had been addicted to Valium at the time, although he claimed that this was a brief stint and that he was sober during the trial. In July 1986, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, resulting in a mistrial. 2 years later, the state of Alaska retried the case. The prosecution produced 2 additional witnesses, a pair of brothers who had fished with Peel in Kodiak, Alaska, and these brothers claimed that Peel had confessed to the killings. However, the defense was able to cast doubt on the story, pointing out that one of the brothers, Sam Wasso, had been offered a plea bargain to testify in exchange for a misdemeanor conviction in a separate case. This development was the final blow to the prosecution's case, and after 4 days of deliberation, the jury found John Peel not guilty on all charges. In 2016, Lisa and Lori Colthurst sat down with John Peel in an attempt to find some semblance of closure. After talking with him, Lori believes that while Peel might not have pulled the trigger, he had a significant role in the murders. John Peel later sued the state of Alaska and was awarded an out-of-court settlement reported to be $900,000. "Somebody out there knows what happened," Peel said in a 2017 interview. "Somebody was responsible for this, but I'm not going to waste any more of my life on it." The coldest reality of this case comes from Ava Goodman, Dean Moon's sister, who reflected on the second trial. "When he was declared not guilty, you're incredibly let down, you're sad, and then you realize that it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change that my brother is gone." The antagonist from the Friday the 13th saga, Jason Voorhees, has been immortalized in pop culture. Although Jason is a fictional character, the best stories often have parallels with reality. In Jason's case, these routes take us to Lake Bodom in Espoo, Finland. Lake Bodom is a serene body of water located outside the capital city of Helsinki. In the summer of 1960, 4 teenagers embarked on a camping trip to Lake Bodom, a popular destination for hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts. 18-year-olds Niels Gustafsson and Seppo Boisman, along with their 15-year-old girlfriends Maila Bjorklund and Anja Maki, set out on June 4th for a night of fun. The group spent the evening drinking, swimming, and socializing before turning in for the night at around 10:30 p.m. The following morning, 2 boys out birdwatching noticed a tent that appeared to have been slashed open, with a blond man seen leaving the area. They paid little attention to the scene and continued their birdwatching. Later that day, a local resident discovered a gruesome sight at the tent. Bjorklund and Gustafsson were found lying inside, bloodied, while Boisman and Maki were found dead inside the tent. The girls had been stabbed multiple times, and the boys had been both bludgeoned and stabbed. Miraculously, Niels Gustafsson survived, though he suffered a broken jaw. He claimed to have no memory of the previous night, recalling only a figure dressed in black with red eyes committing the crimes. Locals immediately suspected Valdemar Geilstrom, a kiosk operator near Lake Bodom's southern shore, who was known for his dislike of campers. Initially, Geilstrom was ruled out as a suspect thanks to an alibi provided by his wife, though this alibi had been questioned in recent years. In a 2019 Swedish news article, Ulf Johansson, a 35-year member of the Espoo City Council, strongly asserted that Geilstrom was responsible for the massacre. He said, "No Espoo or local resident would have camped in that place. The people of Ors knew that the kiosk man cut the tent cords so that the tent would fall down. He'd laugh loudly and leave. And this is what the kiosk man always did if someone dared to camp there. He thought he was the boss of the place and chased everyone away. Johansson also believed Gilstrom suffered from mental illness, explaining, during the war, World War II, he was admitted to a mental hospital. He exhibited symptoms of impulsiveness and mindless violence, alternating with calm, manipulative periods consistent with psychopathic traits. Gilstrom reportedly confessed to the murders in a drunken state in 1969 before drowning himself. Another suspect was Pentti Soininen, who had a criminal record and allegedly boasted in prison about killing the 3 campers. However, police were doubtful, as Soininen would have only been 14 at the time of the murders, and they found it unlikely that he could have overpowered 4 older teenagers. Strangely, Soininen hanged himself on the anniversary of the murders in 1969. A former National Socialist and suspected KGB spy, Hans Assmann, was also investigated but was eventually cleared due to his alibi. However, doubts lingered due to his alleged connections to the KGB. Despite these persons of interest, the police had little forensic evidence and the case soon went cold. Then, in 2005, 45 years after the murders, a bombshell hit the Finnish news media. Nils Gustafsson, the sole survivor, was arrested for the crime. According to an article in The Guardian, authorities pointed to new DNA evidence, which found the blood of the other 3 victims on Gustafsson's shoes, but not his own. Additionally, Detective Chief Inspector Marko Tuminen stated that Gustafsson had remarked, "What's done is done," after being arrested. The police theorized that Gustafsson had killed his companions and then inflicted his injuries on himself to cover up his actions. However, Gustafsson maintained his story of memory loss and denied the accusations in court. A jury ultimately sided with him, and on October 7, 2005, he was found not guilty. Under Finnish law, the prosecution did not appeal the acquittal, and there had been no new developments in the case since. Nearly 65 years later, the mystery of the Lake Bodom murders continues to intrigue amateur and professional detectives worldwide. In the Friday the 13th movies, someone survives, and Jason is eventually banished or killed. But in reality, the story is much murkier and darker. What remains clear is that an all-too-real Jason Voorhees committed one of the most heinous crimes in Finnish history, and will likely get away with it. What if? 2 of the most intriguing words when you pair them together. When we look back on history, these 2 words often come to mind. The tragedy of the Rwandan genocide is known worldwide. In just 100 days, an estimated 800,000 to 1 million Tutsi and moderate Hutus were massacred, while hundreds of thousands more innocents suffered unspeakable atrocities. The situation is made even more horrifying by the fact that it almost didn't happen. Peace in the region was nearly secured until April 6, 1994, and this brings us to one of history's greatest what-ifs. The Rwandan Civil War directly led to the genocide. In 1990, ethnic tensions between the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, and the Hutu-majority Rwandan government erupted when the RPF invaded Rwanda from Uganda. Many RPF rebels had served in the Ugandan army to escape persecution before deserting to fight in the Civil War. By February 20th, 1993, the war had reached a stalemate, with both sides vying for control of Kigali, the capital city. The RPF declared a ceasefire, which led to the signing of the Arusha Accords on August 4th, 1993. This fragile peace lasted until April 6th, 1994, when 2 missiles shattered the uneasy truce. Linda Melbourne, a renowned British journalist, interviewed a Rwandan soldier for her book, A People Betrayed, The Role of the West in Rwanda's Genocide. The soldier vividly recalled that fateful April evening, saying, "Its engine sounded different from other planes, that is, the president's engine. We were looking toward where the plane was coming from, and we saw a projectile, then a ball of flame, and we saw the plane go down. I saw it." At around 8:15 p.m. local time, Burundian President Cyprien Ntaryamira and Rwandan President Yuvenal Habyarimana were on a flight back to Kigali from Zaire. The two Hutu leaders, along with several government officials and 3 French crew members, were returning from discussions about the Arusha Accords. 2 surface-to-air missiles struck their Dassault Falcon 50 presidential plane, crashing it into the presidential palace garden and killing everyone on board. This assassination triggered the Rwandan genocide, which began that very night. The perpetrators have never been officially identified, but 3 major theories exist: the Tutsis, the Hutus, and the French. Many Hutus believe that the Tutsis arranged the assassination. Some have accused Paul Kagame, and former RPF commander and current president of Rwanda, of orchestrating the attack. Kagame was thought to have had a significant interest in seizing power. In 2006, Mark Doyle, former BBC World Affairs correspondent, stated, "Kagame's soldiers took control after the genocide. I have no doubt that if he wanted to down the plane, he would have had the technical and military capacity to do so." Kagame has shown little concern for his international reputation. Ever since the genocide, he has made it clear that he has no respect for an international community that largely stood by while hundreds of thousands were killed. On July 5, 2004, former RPF Second Lieutenant Alois Ruyenzi spoke in Norway after fleeing Rwanda. Lieutenant Ruyenzi claimed, "Let me be crystal clear. I attended the last meeting where the plan was hatched. I was there physically, and I even know the names of those who carried out the shooting." The allegations against Kagame were so significant that in 2007, a French judge accused him of orchestrating the attack and called for him to stand trial. This led to Rwanda severing all diplomatic ties with France on August 9, 2007, a stance that was reversed 2 years later. In 2011, while visiting France, Kagame said it was time to leave history behind. In 2018, France dropped the charges, though Cyprien Untariamira's widow appealed the decision, which was upheld in 2020. Another theory is that extremist Hutu politicians and military members were responsible for the assassination. Declassified CIA documents revealed that former U.S. ambassador to Rwanda, David Rawson, was told by a source that rogue Hutu elements of the military, possibly the elite presidential guard, were responsible. These ultra-conservative Hutu leaders were fiercely opposed to the Arusha records, and multiple reports suggest that some government officials were calling for a final solution to eliminate all Tutsis. This sentiment was further propagated during the genocide by radio television RTLM, a station allegedly run by the Hutu government. According to the same CIA source, the Rwandan military tried to rein in those rogue elements but failed. Meanwhile, the RPF denied any involvement in the attack. The third theory implicates the French government in shooting down the plane. Kagame has remained steadfast in his belief that France was involved. Linda Melvern has written about the extent of French knowledge during the genocide, noting that at the time of the genocide's planning, the French government had 47 senior officials embedded in the Rwandan army, which later played a significant role in the atrocities. Despite this, the United Nations locked away the flight data recorder, or black box, for 10 years before it resurfaced in 2004. After investigation, the UN claimed the black box contained no relevant information about the crash. 2 French presidents have acknowledged France's role in the genocide. In 2010, Nicolas Sarkozy visited Rwanda and admitted that France made mistakes in 1994, calling it an error of judgment, though he stopped short of offering an apology. In 2021, Emmanuel Macron formally apologized during his visit to Kigali, stating that France valued silence over the examination of the truth. Macron reiterated this in April 2024 during the 30th anniversary of the genocide, noting that France, which could have stopped the genocide with its Western and African allies, lacked the will to do so. As of June 2024, the United Nations has refrained from naming an official culprit. The investigation has been closed. The true horror of this unsolved mystery lies in the lingering question: what if? What if the plane had never been shot down? What if the genocide had been averted? These are questions that will never have concrete answers. One of the most important and often underappreciated jobs in today's society is that of investigative journalists. They work to hold everyone accountable while shining a light on things that happen in the dark. It's common for them to travel to far-flung regions of the world to get first-hand accounts of relevant events for a story. Unfortunately, investigating dark areas of the world can often have fatal consequences, as was the case with Ilaria Alpi and Miran Hrovatin. Born in Rome on May 24, 1961, Ilaria Alpi was a bright young star in Italian journalism. Alpi was accepted into the prestigious Sapienza University of Rome, one of the oldest universities in the world, founded in 1301. The quadrilingual student graduated with a degree in literature and languages and received a scholarship to work in Cairo for their newspapers. In December 1992, Alpi was sent to Somalia with Ray 3, an Italian TV station. She and her cameraman, Miran Hrovatin, were in Mogadishu covering Operation Restoring Hope, a United Nations task force responsible for providing humanitarian aid to the people of Somalia, who were enduring mass starvation as a result of the civil war. Simultaneously, Alpi was investigating whether the aid was being used appropriately or if it had any ties to arms and waste trafficking in Somalia. Italy was known to have sold arms to Somali leader Said Barth before the Civil War, who stockpiled them in warehouses. It was not just the Italian government. Many European businesses also provided weapons to local warlords and clans as payment for disposing of toxic waste in Somalia. By March 1994, Alpi's investigation was gaining momentum, though it is unclear what she and Hrovatin uncovered. On the 20th of that month, the duo was headed back to Mogadishu from Bosaso after interviewing a local warlord when 7 masked men wielding AK-47 rifles ambushed them and their driver as they were returning to the Italian embassy. Their vehicle was riddled with bullets, killing both Hrovatin and Alpi almost instantly. Their driver and his companions survived the ordeal. At first, the killings were thought to be retaliation for Italian skirmishes with local Somali tribesmen. However, as the investigation progressed, Alpi's work became public knowledge, leading to speculation. In 1999, Alpi's mother, Luciana Alpi, wrote a book titled The Execution, The Killing of Ilaria Alpi and Miran Hrovatin. In her book, Luciana alleged that the Italian government was directly responsible for her daughter's murder and that it was orchestrated by the Italian Secret Service. The following year, Hashi Omar Hassan, a Somali native, was convicted of the murders and sentenced to life in prison. Despite the conviction, doubts about Hassan's guilt arose almost immediately. Suspicion grew when, in October 2001, his life sentence was commuted to 26 years in prison after a court ruled that the murders were not premeditated. In 2004, the Italian parliament finally launched a commission to investigate whether the deaths of Alpi and Hrovatin were connected to arms and waste trafficking between Italy and Somalia. Reporters Without Borders Secretary General Robert Menard wrote to Commission head Carlo Taormina saying, "You have the authority, the means, and the duty to find out the truth. The Commission is the last chance to do so." Taormina's conduct during the Commission appeared to derail the investigation. He controversially concluded in 2006, in Somalia, she, Alpi, was on vacation. The objectivity of Ray 3 is always the communist one. All the claims in the study and for the Commission asserted the truth no one speaks. I have respect and sorrow for the killing of Ilaria and Miran. It was a bandit act. And it is false that Ilaria was executed for her services. Stop. Taormina later reiterated his stance on Twitter, saying, "It is the truth." Menard strongly refuted these allegations, stating, quote, that Carlo Taormina directed the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into Ilaria Alpi is an endless shame. The files from the 2004 inquiry were declassified in 2014. Francesco Fonti, a former member of the 'Ndrangheta Calabrian Mafia turned informant, supported Menard's claims in 2009, asserting that Alpi and Hrovatin were killed after witnessing toxic waste being dumped in Bosaso, the port city that they were leaving at the time of their deaths. The case gained renewed attention in 2016 when Hashi Omar Hassan had his conviction overturned by appeals court and was rewarded $3.2 million, approximately $3.5 million USD in compensation. Luciana Alpi supported Hassan's appeal, expressing happiness at his release but also feeling bitter and depressed. It's as if she and Miran Hrovatin died of the heat in Mogadishu, Luciana said. We don't have the truth. and I don't think we ever will. A year later, the Rome Public Prosecutor's Office sought to close the case, citing the impossibility of identifying the motive and perpetrators of the murders and lack of evidence of alleged misdirection. However, the request was denied by General Prosecutor Andrea Finelli in 2019. After his legal proceedings were completed, Hassan returned to Somalia, where he lived in relative peace until July 6, 2022, when he was killed by a car bomb placed under his seat. Hassan's longtime attorney, Antonio Morricone, did not believe his client's death was connected to the 1994 murders, stating, "It was the Islamic terrorists, no doubt. They killed him for the purpose of extortion over the money he received for his unjust detention in Italy. They are people looking for money, and if you don't agree with them, they will kill you." The legacy of Ilaria Alpi and Miran Hrovatin have left an immeasurable impact on Italian journalism. In 1995, the Ilaria Alpi Award was created in their honor, and from 1995 until 2014, it stood as one of the highest Italian awards for investigative journalism. In its place, the DIG Awards were established, a 5-day festival celebrating investigative journalism. Its 10th annual celebration is scheduled for September 18th to the 22nd. To date, no one else has been arrested, tried, or convicted for the murders of Alpi and Hrovatin. President Sergio Mattarella of Italy perhaps said it best on the 30th anniversary of their murders on March 20th, 2024. The memory of Alpi and Hrovatin calls for a commitment to remove obstacles to freedom of information, wherever they may be. Since the time of Roman rule in AD 48, Llanhari have been known as a key source of Welsh iron. This rich history of iron mining has persisted through the Elizabethan era and into modern times. However, since 1993, the villagers of Llanhari have been searching for something equally valuable but far less tangible: truth. Truth behind one of the United Kingdom's most bizarre unsolved murders. Harry and Meghan Toos, aged 64 and 67 respectively, were enjoying their golden years in Llanhari. Harry, a prolific cabbage farmer, had retired from his gardening business in 1986 when the couple's daughter moved out. Although retired from agriculture, Harry continued to grow cabbage on his remote farm and used his trusty 12-gauge shotgun to ward off rabbits. In 1992, however, the shotgun mysteriously disappeared and Harry replaced it. On July 26, 1993, the day began like any other for the Tooses. They went into downtown Llanhari to collect their pensions and later visit a Tesco grocery store, as they had done every Monday for nearly 15 years. In the parking lot, Harry unexpectedly bumped into one of his sisters. "We met them at Tesco and had a little chat about the family," she told Crime Watch UK in 1993. "They were very quiet and a very devoted couple." Around 11 a.m., a neighbor saw Harry and Meghan arriving home from the supermarket. Later, neighbors heard 2 gunshots at 1:30 p.m. but dismissed them, assuming Harry was shooting rabbits in the cabbage garden. That evening, when the Tooses didn't answer their nightly phone call from their daughter Cheryl, the community grew concerned and contacted the local police. Authorities discovered the couple's bodies under hay in their barn, both having been shot execution-style with a 12-gauge shotgun. Strangely, the house was immaculate, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. In fact, Meghan's china had been laid out and tea had been prepared. South Wales Police Detective Superintendent Colin Jones remarked in a Crime Watch UK interview that this particular china was only used for important visitors. A thumbprint belonged to Jonathan Jones, Cheryl's fiancé, was found on one of the china cups, leading to his arrest in December 1993. Prosecutors argued that Jonathan's motive was financial, an inheritance of £150,000, about $200,000. After a grueling 55-day trial, Jonathan was found guilty by 10-2 majority verdict and sentenced to life imprisonment, the harshest penalty in the UK. However, almost immediately after the conviction, the presiding judge, Sir Richard George Rougier, expressed doubts about the trial. He remarked that the prosecution had fallen decidedly flat, and that if he were a juror, he would be conscious of significant doubt. He also highlighted the contrast between the ruthlessness of the killer and the man who sat before them. Throughout the ordeal, Cheryl stood by Jonathan, even offering a £25,000 reward from her inheritance to find the real killer. In 1996, the Court of Appeal of England and Wales re-examined the case and found significant flaws in the prosecution's evidence. Forensic analysis revealed no biological material linking Jonathan to the crime, and it was noted that he had no experience with guns. On April 25, 1996, nearly a year after his conviction, Jonathan Jones was freed, with Cheryl calling it a victory for love and truth. With Jonathan exonerated, the police were back to square one, and the case went cold and was scaled down in 2008. And then in 2011, John Cooper was convicted of 2 double murders, as well as 30 burglaries, and was sentenced to 2 whole life terms. Cooper had first been investigated due to his appearance on a British reality TV show, Bullseye, where he resembled composite sketches of the burglar. Investigators were particularly interested in him because he used a shotgun in his double murders, where all 4 victims were shot at point-blank range. However, unlike the Twosies' case, Cooper always stole from his victims, and nothing had been stolen from the Two's home. Additionally, Cooper kept his shotgun between murders, whereas a shotgun barrel was found in a quarry a quarter of a mile from the Two's farm. These inconsistencies, along with the fact that the Two's table had been set for a visitor, suggested that Harry and Meghan may have known their killer. Cooper was never charged in connection with the Two's murders. In July 2023, the 30th anniversary of the murders, South Wales Police announced a forensic review of the case, hoping that new DNA testing might finally solve one of the most chilling unsolved murders in Welsh history. Jonathan Jones, now married to Cheryl for over 25 years, spoke to the Daily Mail on July 30th, 2023 about the forensic review, saying, "Without wanting to raise expectations too high, I have high hopes that the new technology will yield some results. It would lift a weight that both Cheryl and I have been carrying for 30 years, and we will be delighted when and if that happens." Good night. I love you. We say these words each time we go to sleep, fully expecting to see our loved ones when the sun rises again. For Cynthia de Wallaby, those were the last words she ever spoke to her daughter. Born on May 17, 1981, in Chicago, Illinois, Jacqueline de Wallaby was the only child of Jimmy and Cynthia Guess. After Cynthia and Jimmy split, Cynthia married David de Wallaby when Jacqueline was just 2 years old. David adopted Jacqueline as his own daughter 6 months after their wedding in 1983. The following year, Jacqueline's half-brother David Jr. was born at the couple's home in Midlothian, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. They lived in a ranch-style home with David's mother, Anna, who owned the property, and one neighbor, Holly Deck, described the positivity radiating from the household. They were a loving family. They were always hugging their kids, and they never yelled at them. Another neighbor, Robert Tolbert, added that the de Wallabys had a gentle parenting style. They never even spanked them. They'd send them to the rooms and take away their bikes. They didn't believe in corporal punishment. On September 9, 1988, Cynthia took David Jr. and Jacqueline to a Kentucky Fried Chicken for dinner. David Sr. was out bowling with friends, but returned home by 9:30 to be with his family. An hour later, Jacqueline kissed her mother goodnight, told Cynthia she loved her, and went to bed. At roughly 11 p.m., Cynthia checked on her daughter, who was peacefully asleep. It was the last time Jacqueline was seen alive. The following morning, David Sr. woke up at around 8 a.m. and was surprised that Jacqueline had not yet turned on the television for Saturday morning cartoons. He checked her room and found it ransacked. Nothing had appeared to be missing except Jacqueline and her blanket. David later told police that he waited an hour for Cynthia to wake up, assuming Jacqueline was out playing with a friend. Cynthia immediately sensed something was wrong and began searching the house and neighborhood. She discovered that their screen door, usually locked and closed, was slightly open. On her way to a neighbor's house, Cynthia made a chilling discovery. The basement window had been smashed, and the screen was cut. The de Wallabys rushed to the Midlothian Police Department to report Jacqueline missing. Initially, Jacqueline's biological father, Jimmy, was considered a person of interest, as he had once attempted to kidnap Jacqueline after losing custody. However, Jimmy was cleared of any involvement as he was serving a 7-year sentence on unrelated charges in Florida. The Midlothian Police Department swiftly began their search for Jacqueline, employing various resources, including ATVs and underwater search teams. Aside from the forced entry through the basement, only a single foreign hair and a few smudges were recovered as forensic evidence. Tracker dogs on site were unable to pick up any scent. As hours passed with no ransom note, the FBI joined the investigation. David Sr. and Cynthia fully cooperated with the authorities, and David Sr. passed a polygraph test administered by the FBI. Despite the extensive efforts of local state and federal law enforcement, the worst-case scenario unfolded 4 days later. On September 14th, Jacqueline DeWallaby's body was discovered near a dumpster at an apartment complex in Blue Island, Illinois, over 6 miles from her home. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office identified Jacqueline through dental records and determined that she had been strangled. Blood found under Jacqueline's nails was type O positive, matching everyone in her family except David Sr. However, due to the presence of maggots and decomposition, further forensic evidence could not be recovered. Dr. Robert Stein, the medical examiner, believed Jacqueline was killed on the morning of September 10th, the day she disappeared. During the investigation, police interviewed a supposed eyewitness named Everett Mann, a 37-year-old transit ticket taker with a history of mental illness. Mann told police that he saw a man with a large, straight nose near the dumpsters at around 2 a.m. on the morning of the murder. His description of the suspect's car changed multiple times before he settled on identifying it as about a 1979 Chevy Malibu. David Sr. owned a light blue 1980 Chevy Malibu. In a police lineup, Mann picked out David Sr. as having a nose structure closest to the person he saw. However, it should be noted that David Sr.'s picture was a larger frontal view, while the other photos were smaller side views. The head of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office South Suburban Prosecutions, Robert Clifford, expressed doubts about the accuracy of Mann's identification. Still, Patrick O'Brien, head of the Felony Trial Division, proceeded with grand jury indictments based on the theory that the basement window had been broken from the inside and staged. Cynthia and David Sr. were arrested on November 22, 1988, and held without bond. O'Brien pressed forward despite new forensic evidence showing that the window had been broken from the outside. During cross-examination, Mann seemed far less certain about his identification, saying, "It seemed like a man. It appeared to be a large nose," while adding that the parking lot lighting was poor. He also retracted his earlier statement about the car, saying it mostly resembled a Chevy Malibu. At the conclusion of the prosecution's case in the joint trial of David Sr. and Cynthia, Circuit Court Judge Richard E. Neville ruled Cynthia not guilty due to a lack of evidence. However, David Sr. was convicted after just 14 hours of jury deliberation and sentenced to 45 years in prison for first-degree murder and concealing a homicide. Cynthia and David Sr. sought the help of Professor David Protess from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. His investigation raised serious questions about the prosecution's case, particularly regarding the credibility of Everett Mann, who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder before his interview. On October 30th, 1991, David Sr.'s conviction was unanimously overturned by the Illinois Appellate Court. The court stated, "We note that the probative evidence against David is no greater than the probative evidence against co-defendant Cynthia." The trial court determined that there was insufficient evidence to convict Cynthia and direct a verdict in her favor. We conclude that the trial erred in denying David's motion for a directed verdict. The only other potential suspect, Timothy Guess, a paranoid schizophrenic and brother of Jacqueline's biological father, was dismissed by police. Guess had provided a fictitious alibi for the night of the murder, but subsequent interviews with restaurant staff refuted his claim. When questioned, Timothy offered bizarre explanations, including that the spirit made him invisible. He was never charged and died of bladder cancer in 2002 at the age of 41. Professor Protess published a book about the case, Gone in the Night, in 1993, and CBS aired a 2-part television movie of the same title in 1996. In 2016, ABC 7 Chicago revisited the case, interviewing David Sr. and Cynthia's former defense lawyers. David's attorney, Ralph Metchick, suggested his client had been an emotional scapegoat, saying, "I don't think they had a very strong case, but because it was such an emotionally charged case, they needed a defendant." As of June 2024, police have not made any further arrests. The most heartbreaking part of this case isn't the lack of a conviction, but the fact that one was needed at all. A 7-year-old girl never got the chance to grow up. David Sr. will carry the legacy of his adopted stepdaughter forever, encapsulated in his final words at her eulogy. "You will still be a cheerleader and anything you ever wanted to be in life, in my heart." Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations.